Hello my international darlings and welcome back to another video on Mary B's channel. And yes, that's me. Yes, I know, I said the video would be about the songs and believe me, I even started writing said script. But in the middle of the process, I realized it would be a little bit confusing to talk about the songs before the breakup because a lot of those were made after the breakup and about the breakup. So I decided to change a little bit and I hope you guys won't mind. In this episode, I'm going to talk about how the Beatles ended, the process called by many, Lennon and McCartney included, by divorce. First, I would like to clarify that this episode will not focus on the reasons why the Beatles broke up. There are a lot of theories for that, many different points of view, and no universal truth. Of course, there is a general explanation in which we know Alan Klein was one of the main guilty of disrupting the harmony between the members of the band. But it's not as simple as that. Alan just got into the scene because they didn't have Epstein anymore, who sadly passed away in the middle of 1968, when things started to get ugly. As Lennon said to Alien Mintz in 1976, it's like asking a divorced couple, what was the day that you decided that the marriage wasn't going well? I didn't. There was no date. If you guys would like a video about why the Beatles broke up, please let it down in the comments. But what we can do in this video is analyze how this affected John and Paul's relationship, or even how their relationship affected the band's end. In the last video, I talked about India and how many people believe something bad happened between Paul and John there, because right after the trip, they engaged in relationships with Lyndon and Yoko, started fighting more frequently, and in 1997, the Beatles came to an end. The trip to India happened in 1968, and the recordings of the documentary Let It Be began in January 1969. Its director, Michael Lindsay Hogg, talked about the Beatles meeting he attended at the time of the movie production. In his book, Luck and Circumstance, a coming of age in Hollywood, New York, and points beyond, he recalls a situation when John Lennon played a cassette of him and Yoko making love for everyone in the room. He said, as the meeting was drawing to a very close, John, not this day with Yoko, who hadn't seemed particularly connected with what was going on, said he wanted to play us a tape he and Yoko had made. He got up and put the cassette into the tape machine and stood beside it as we listened it. The soft murmuring voices did not at first signal their purpose. It was a man and a woman, but hard to hear. The microphone had been at a distance. I wondered if the lack of clarity was the point. Were we even meant to understand what was going on? Was it kind of an artwork where we would not be able to put the voices into a context? And was context important? I felt perhaps it was something John and Yoko were examining. But then, after a few minutes, it became clear. John and Yoko were making love, with endearments, giggles, heavy breathing, both real and satirical, and the occasional, more direct sounds of pleasure, reaching for a climax, all recorded by the faraway microphone. But there was something innocent about it too, as though they were engaged in a sweet, serious game. John clicked off the button and turned again to look toward the table, his eyebrows quizzical above his round glasses, seemingly genuinely curious about what reaction his little tape would elicit. However often they'd shared the small rooms in Hamburg, whatever they knew of each other's love and sex lives, this tape seemed to have stopped the other three cold. Perhaps it touched a reserve of residual northern reticence. After a palpable silence, Paul said, well, that's an interesting one. The others muttered something and the meeting was over. It occurred to me as I was walking down the stairs what we'd heard could have been an expression of 1960s freedom and openness, but was it more likely that it was as if a gauntlet had been thrown down? You need to understand that this is where she and I are right now. I don't want to hold your hand anymore. Oh, and an interesting fact to point out, Michael Lindsay Hogg was also the director of the movie Two of Us, which I already made a video about on this channel, and let's just say that every Mclennon believer must watch it. Personally, and unlike many Beatles fans, I don't believe Yoko broke the Beatles up. Sure, her intermission during the recording sections would create tension among the group, but it was not even 1% of the problems they faced. In the book John Lennon: The Life by Philip Norman, Yoko recalls some of her impressions on the Lennon-McCartney dynamic. Indeed, John's wounded anger was more that of an exposed and ex-colleague, reinforcing a suspicion already in Yoko's mind that his feelings for Paul had been far more intense than the world at large ever guessed. From chance remarks he had made, she gathered there had even been a moment where, on the principle that Bohemians should try everything, he had contemplated an affair with Paul, but had been derided by Paul's immovable heterosexuality. Nor, apparently, was Yoko the only one to have picked up on this. Around Apple, in her hearing, Paul would sometimes be called John's princess. She had also heard a rehearsal tape with John's voice calling out, "Paul, Paul," in a strangely subservient, pleading way. I knew there was something going on there, she remembers, from his point of view, not from Paul's. And he was so angry at Paul, I couldn't help wondering what it was really about. That was not the only time Yoko felt something off with that relationship. In the Revolution House tape, Yoko said, "I'm sure that if Paul had been a woman or something, he would have been a great threat, because there's something definitely very strong with me, John, and Paul. Paul is the one I feel the vibration, sort of sense it." Despite Yoko not being the true reason behind the Beatles breaking up, it is fair to say that her presence made Paul very uncomfortable sometimes, if not jealous. In the book Apple to the Core by Peter Maccabee and Robert Schoenfeld, it is said that, with Yoko present, Paul McCartney's reign as Lennon's princess was doomed. In the chapter Give Us a Kiss, Queer Codes, Male Partnering and the Beatles of the book The Queer 60s, the writer Anne Shingalaw analyzed the Beatles' homosocial union. She said, "When Lennon and McCartney found women who served as substantial life partners, the woman upset the group's intense homosocial bond by taking the places previously held by the other Beatle as best friend/partner. As Jim O'Donnell's book The Day John Met Paul suggests, there is an elemental Adam and Eve quality to the union of Lennon and McCartney within the world of rock and roll. It is interesting to know that the breakup of the Beatles was largely, at the time, attributed to the intrusion of a woman into the Beatles' recording sessions. When Yoko Ono joined Lennon, the homosocial union of the Beatles was disrupted. That Ono's presence threatened Lennon's male partners to the extent claimed in popular myth speaks of the intense bond or marriage that had predated Ono's arrival. Differently from what many people believe, the one who broke the Beatles up was not Paul, but John. In a meeting, he announced he was leaving the band, but they agreed to not make it public, what Paul would later do as a strategy to sell his solo album. In an interview to Rolling Stone in 1970, John talked about this episode.
And then we were discussing something in the office with Paul, and Paul was saying something or other, like to do something, and I kept saying no to everything he said, you see. So it came to a point I had to say something. Paul said, "Well, what do you mean then?" So I said, "I mean, the group's over, I'm leaving." And but Alan was there. He'll remember exactly, and she will. This is how I see it. Alan was saying, "Don't tell." He didn't want me to tell Paul even, but I couldn't help it, so I told him it's out. I couldn't stop it. It came out, and Paul and Alan said they were glad that I wasn't going to announce it. That I was going to make an event out of it, right? But Paul and Alan both. I don't know whether Paul said don't tell anybody, but he was damn pleased that I wasn't. He said, "Oh well, that means nothing really happened if you're not going to say anything." So that's what happened. Well, I mean, like anybody when you say divorce, the face goes all sorts of colours. It's like he knew really that this was the final thing, And then 6 months later he comes out with whatever, I told Ray Conley, so a lot of people knew I'd left, but I was a fool not to do it, Not to do what Paul did, which is use it to sell a record.
In another Philip Norman's book, Shout, he wrote, "Yet even John's resentment over Paul announcing the breakup first does not explain his later remark to Yoko that no one had ever hurt him the way Paul hurt him. It almost suggests that deep beneath the schoolboy friendship and the complementary musical brilliance lay some streak of homosexual adoration that John himself never realized. He might have longed to get away from Paul, but he could never quite get over him. It was in 1971 that John was questioned. I asked Lee Eastman for his view on the split and what it was that prompted Paul to file suit to dissolve the Beatles' partnership. And he said it was because John asked for a divorce. To which he answered, "Because I asked for a divorce? That's a childish reason for going to court, isn't it?" As for Paul, his reaction to John's request was heartbreak. It seems that the decision of announcing his exit of the band was motivated by this very feeling of abandonment, as if he was trying to clap back to what John did to him. In Anthology, Paul talked about his decisions. I started thinking, well, if that's the case, not getting back together, I had better get myself together. I just can't let John control the situation and dump us as if we were jilted girlfriends. Jonathan Colt, in his book Can't Buy Me Love, The Beatles, Britain and America, reflects about the songs McCartney composed at the very end of the band, especially Oh Darling. Apart from its wonderfully nuanced lead vocal, Oh Darling is an expression of musical minimalism. It matches a relentlessly simple accompaniment with a relentlessly repetitive lyric that offers a promise of good behavior, "I'll never do you no harm," as a prelude to a desperate plea, "If you leave me, I'll never make it alone." Given the state of relationships among the Beatles during this time, it is hard to imagine that Paul's rendering of this heartbroken Sandman, however satiric, did not have some basis in his sense of rejection by John. In Bob Spitz's biography of the Beatles, released in 2005, it is told, "It never occurred to Paul just how much he missed John. More than anyone else, John had been his friend for 10 years, to say nothing of his collaborator, his sidekick, his shadow. Not only had they played music together, they'd hung out together, dreamed together, fucked together, become famous together, grown up together. We were each other's intimates," he acquiesced. By the barest amounts, the relationship had given him security, warmth, humor, wit, money, fame. At first, Paul held out the hope that the separation was temporary, admitting that nobody, especially himself, quite knew if it was just one of John's little flings and that maybe he was going to feel the pinch in a week's time and say, "I was only kidding." But as the weeks and months tickled away, Paul finally realized it wasn't a joke. Convinced that John was abandoning him now, Increasingly jealous of his relationship with Yoko and Alan Klein, Paul atoned for their loss with his anger. He was angry at the Beatles, but even angrier at John. It took another 6 months for him to admit the extent of his heartbreak. John is in love with Yoko, Paul confessed to a reporter from the Evening Standard, and he's no longer in love with the three of us. But for all intents and purposes, he might as well have been talking about himself. Although the jealousy of Paul towards John and Yoko was pointed out more frequently, John felt the very same about Paul and Linda. A project of a biographical pamphlet, The Beatles from Apple, made Lennon really angry. He wrote corrections and comments in almost every one of the 76 pages, most of them related to how he presented the band. The only page I could find of it was the cover of the project you are seeing right now, but inside the book there was a picture of Paul and Linda's wedding, in which Lennon crossed the word wedding and wrote funeral. Another occasion that Lennon's jealousy got clear was related in Chris Salawicz's book, McCartney the Biography. The author wrote, "Yet it seems no coincidence that John remarried only a week after Paul's wedding. No matter how much he loved Yoko, the Gibbertrag ceremony seems something close to an on-the-rebound reaction to the loss of his great first love, Paul McCartney." In later years, John would admit that Paul had been the first love of his life, and Yoko the second. Along the years, other personalities would share their minds on the divorce situation. In the following video, Pangiletti affirms that Lennon and McCartney were love affairs. Let's watch it.
Volatile groups, Lennon and McCartney, Martin and Lewis, Gilbert and Sullivan. You don't have teams nowadays, so we have to go back in time. But Martin and Lewis, and especially Lennon and McCartney, those two groups, were love affairs. Those were two people who fell in love. Lennon and McCartney were certainly in love. And then when things start to not go right, love is heartbreaking. Teller and I started without any natural affection at all. I didn't have that, that feeling you have of wanting to hug somebody or wanting to be around them or really feel affectionate toward them, which I feel towards a lot of people. I never felt toward Teller. Our relationship was essentially an email relationship before email.
To finish this video, I would like to share with you guys a quote from Sandra Chavez's book, The Other Side of Lennon, that really sums up what we've been talking about in this video. Whilst the Beatles had always been marketed as an heterosexual group, in contrast with the Stones, whose image was androgynous, they were sympathetic to the homosexual population. Lennon himself was alleged to have had affairs with both men and women, and although he never openly admitted to me, his condemnation of Britain as a land which feeds on a homosexual subculture persuades me at this late stage that he was speaking from experience. I am sure that the breakup of the Beatles, or more specifically of John and Paul, must have been more traumatic than any of us suspect. And that's it, my international darlings. That was a long one, and I'm really afraid I might be forgetting some other important information because there are so many things about their breakup that it's really difficult to find and organize all of them. Anyway, as always, I strongly encourage you guys to participate in the comments because I know you always contribute with more facts and quotes. If you guys like this video, please press the thumbs up button and share with a friend you think might like it too. Subscribe to become a certified international darling. I don't know what that is, but it sounds cool, right? Anyway, if you watched this video until now, please comment John's Princess. I see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.